Tonight, when you fill up your tank or pay for a grab ride, you probably won't think about a narrow strip of water 8,000 kilometers away. You'll just see the number. It feels random. It isn't. Right now, one of the busiest oil choke points on the planet is barely functioning, and that single fact is quietly rewriting the price of almost everything you buy. Here's what's actually happening behind the scenes. Since late February 2026, the Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed. This is the narrow channel between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, and roughly a fifth of the world's oil, along with a huge share of the world's liquefied natural gas, normally passes through it. When military conflict broke out between Iran, Israel, and the United States, tankers stopped moving through that channel. Insurers stopped covering ships willing to try. And almost overnight, a chunk of the global energy supply simply vanished from the map. You might be asking, why does a war so far away change what you pay at home? The answer is that oil doesn't trade locally, it trades globally. When supply drops anywhere, the price rises everywhere. Economists at the World Bank tracked this in their Commodity Markets Outlook report and found that Brent crude jumped by roughly 65% in a matter of weeks, one of the sharpest oil spikes on record. Not a slow climb, a shock. Now, here's the twist most people miss. The price you see quoted on the news is not always the price someone actually pays. Researcher Lutz Kilian, who has spent decades studying how oil shocks move through economies, has long argued that headline oil futures can lag far behind the real, physical cost of crude when a genuine supply disruption is underway. In this crisis, that gap became enormous. Futures markets calmed down faster than physical cargoes did because buyers in Asia and the Middle East were paying a steep premium just to secure actual barrels, not paper contracts. That's the real number driving up shipping costs, plastics, fertilizer, and yes, the diesel that moves your groceries. Think about what that means in practice. A fertilizer plant in Indonesia pays more for feedstock. A shipping company routing goods through the Indian Ocean pays more for fuel and insurance. A factory in Vietnam pays more to run its machines. Every one of those costs gets passed down the chain until it lands on a supermarket shelf near you. You didn't start a war. You didn't disrupt a shipping lane, but you're still paying for it 3 or 4 steps removed in the price of instant noodles and bus fares. There's a reason this particular choke point matters so much more than a normal oil price swing. Some analysts have described it as the largest single supply disruption in decades, larger in scale than the oil embargo of the 1970s, because it doesn't just hit crude. It hits liquefied natural gas at the same time, since much of the world's LNG also sails through that same narrow passage. That means the shock lands on electricity bills and cooking gas at the same moment it lands on gasoline. 2 energy markets getting squeezed together, not one. That's part of why the ripple has felt so wide. And the ripple doesn't stop at energy. Researchers modeling the crisis have pointed out that the same choke point carries fertilizer shipments too, which means the shock moves from energy to chemicals to fertilizer to food in one continuous chain. A farmer in one country pays more for fertilizer. A rice exporter pays more to ship the harvest. A family in an entirely different country pays more for the bag of rice on their kitchen counter. None of those people ever hear about the Strait of Hormuz. They just notice their receipt looks different this month. Wood Mackenzie's head of economics, Peter Martin, described the Strait of Hormuz as the single most critical choke point in global energy markets and warned that the longer a closure drags on, the more it becomes an economic crisis rather than just an energy one. That's the part that should really get your attention. This isn't only about oil, it's about everything oil touches, which is almost everything. So what happens next? That depends entirely on how long the disruption lasts, and nobody can promise an answer. Analysts have sketched out very different paths. In an optimistic scenario, a ceasefire holds. Shipping resumes and prices ease back toward $80 a barrel by the end of the year. In a harsher scenario, the standoff drags on. Physical shortages persist, and the pain compounds through 2026 and into 2027. The International Monetary Fund's own July update already downgraded global growth for the year, citing this exact conflict as a major drag, even while noting that faster-growing regions like India and parts of Southeast Asia are cushioned somewhat by strong domestic demand. Meanwhile, in the United States, the Federal Reserve has been holding interest rates steady rather than cutting them quickly, even as growth slows. That decision matters more to you than it might seem. When the world's largest economy keeps rates elevated, the US dollar tends to stay strong, and oil is priced in dollars everywhere on Earth. So, a strong dollar plus a supply shock is a brutal combination for any country that both imports its oil and holds a weaker currency. Your ringgit, your rupiah, your peso, your baht, all of them buy a little less of the same barrel than they did a year ago. That's not a coincidence. That's two forces compounding at exactly the same time. Should you expect this to resolve quickly? Maybe. Maybe not. More than a month into the disruption, the data has been telling two different stories at once. The futures markets, the ones traders bet on, have quietly drifted back down, pricing in an eventual resolution. But the physical market, the actual price importers pay to get real barrels delivered, has stayed stubbornly high. That gap between hope and reality is exactly where uncertainty lives, and it's exactly why economists are reluctant to promise you a clean timeline. Here's the part that hits closest to home. If you live somewhere that imports most of its oil, and much of Southeast Asia does, this isn't an abstract headline. It shows up as a weaker currency buying less fuel. It shows up as your central bank facing a brutal choice. Raise interest rates to fight the resulting inflation, which slows down jobs and loans, or hold steady and let prices keep climbing. There is no comfortable option here. Every path costs someone money. The only question is, whose money and how visibly? You've probably felt a version of this before without naming it. That moment when a grab fare feels a little steeper, when the price of cooking oil creeps up again, when a plane ticket costs more than it did last year for no clear reason. Now you know one of the real mechanisms behind it. It isn't random, it isn't your imagination. It's a choke point on a map, thousands of miles away, quietly setting the price of your everyday life. What can you actually do with this information? You can't reopen a shipping lane, but you can stop being surprised by prices that seem to move for no reason. You can build a little more slack into your budget when energy-linked costs are volatile, because transport, food, and utilities all move together during a shock like this. You can also watch the signals that matter more than headlines, not just the price of Brent crude, but whether physical cargoes are actually moving again, because that gap between paper prices and real prices is where the true story lives. Wars end, choke points reopen, prices eventually normalize, but the mechanism itself never goes away. Somewhere in the world, right now, another choke point, another shortage, another shock is quietly being priced into your future grocery bill long before it ever makes the news. Tonight, when you check that number on your phone before bed, you'll know exactly why it moved.